Now, if the Labour Party win the election on May the 7th, Douglas Alexander could soon become Foreign Secretary. He was someone who played a key strategic role in the Better Together campaign, and 6 months ago, things went his way. Douglas Alexander, thank you very much for joining us. We were looking back with Alex Salmond and then looking forward. So, from your perspective, let's look back. What was the low point of the campaign for you when you were planning the Better Together effort?
I think the low point was probably about 2 weeks before polling day, the night before the vote on the bedroom tax in the House of Commons. It was a Thursday evening. I'd spoken at a public meeting in East Lothian that evening. It was before that famous YouGov polling number. And I had a sense, I'd debated Nicola on your programme earlier that week, that during the week we were winning the arguments, but we weren't winning the audience. There was a shift in sentiment and in feeling, and my sense was that the coming 2 weeks were going to be absolutely decisive in terms of Scotland's future. If you looked at those 2 weeks, there were two core arguments that were offered. One was the risks and uncertainties of separation, but also the promise of faster, safer, better change. And ultimately, I think it was that message of faster, safer, better change within the United Kingdom that ultimately prevailed.
It did appear, certainly on the streets, as if Better Together were being outgunned and out-campaigned, and it did feel as if the Yes side had struck a particular mood. Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily tell you what people are going to do when they get into the polling stations, but psychologically, were you saying to yourself at any point, this could be lost?
Oh, I was conscious all the way through the campaign that it was for Scotland's people to make a judgment about Scotland's future. There was not an ounce of complacency, but equally I remember that final weekend walking through Buchanan Street when there were people waving flags and demonstrating. They'd been there most of the afternoon. I was on the way through to meet Alistair Darling ahead of his interviews on the Sunday, and at that time we had hundreds, thousands of activists out across Scotland knocking on doors, and in that sense there was always a tension between, do you put people in village halls and town halls? It was great that we reintroduced that tradition during the referendum of those public debates, but on the other hand having those individual conversations which really ultimately came down to being decisive conversations as well.
The results programme, in a sense, was a bit of an anticlimax because Clackmannanshire came through at 1:31 in the morning. Indeed, we were in this very, very studio at the time. So at what point had you decided we've got this? Was it literally when the result came in?
I never really saw it in terms of we've got this. I thought ultimately there was a clear, not overwhelming, but decisive result, and Clackmannan was the key. As soon as the Clackmannan result came through, not least given the stellar place that Clackmannan has played in terms of George Reid and others all the way through Scottish political history over the last 40 years, I thought if Clackmannan has voted no, that's a pretty clear indication that that's the way that ultimately, as it turned out, 28 of the 32 local authorities went.
Let's look forward. One of the expressions that I've been thinking about a lot since the 18th of September was the late Labour leader John Smith's description of the settled will of the people, that devolution was the settled will of the people. Well, of course, in a sense, if we know anything post the 18th of September, is that it doesn't appear to be very settled. Do you think that perhaps another ex-colleague, Tam DL, might be right, that the devolved process is indeed a motorway without exits, and it will all end up with independence at some stage?
No, listen, I would define myself as part of the John Smith tradition. Listen, I've carried torchlight processions and worked with others. I've stood in the meadows in the rain in Edinburgh. I've stood in George Square protesting, demanding, imploring the delivery of a Scottish Parliament. So in that sense, I've always been part of the Home Rule tradition of the Scottish Labour Party. But on the other hand, I think it's fair to say that while we were divided on the issue of independence last September, we were pretty overwhelmingly united in an appetite for change. And my sense is, amidst all of the turbulence and all of the change of the last 6 months, actually what Scotland overwhelmingly wants is not just constitutional but economic and social change. And the battle of the next 6 weeks, rather than just the last 6 months, is actually which political party is going to be able to offer a comprehensive agenda, not just of constitutional but of social and economic change. And that's a battle that I relish.
Alex Salmond was looking beyond the 7th of May, and I thought his comments were quite interesting. Some people have got very excited about the fact that Labour and the SNP are not going to form a formal coalition as if anyone in either party was actually seriously proposing it. It's always been a non-starter, but could there be a progressive alliance after the 7th of May in which Labour and the SNP could work together? Because I'll put the point to you that I put to Alex Salmond, that the tribalism which tends to dominate the relationship between these two parties is at the level of elected politicians and activists. It's not at the level of the people who vote for these parties.
Well, I think there's a decline in tribalism, not just here in Scotland, but right across Western Europe at the moment. In that sense, we're no different from voters in many other countries. In terms of looking ahead to the general election, in every general election since 1945, the largest party has formed the government. That's not a claim on our part, it's just a fact of history. And in that sense, one of the key challenges in the coming weeks is to communicate with people a sense that if you want change, my sense is the change that most people want in Scotland is to get rid of this Tory government. And if you want rid of the Tory government, the surest and safest way to do that is for Labour to be the largest party, larger than the Conservative Party. If the Scottish National Party did even as well as Alec predicts, he wouldn't be in a position to defy the arithmetic, which is every one less Labour MP in Scotland makes it more likely that David Cameron gets more MPs after the election. So in that sense, you can speculate a great deal now about the post-match analysis. Our focus is going to be on the contest and on the match in the coming weeks and months.
But he would be in a position to assist with the delivery of some of the things that Ed Balls was speaking about on this programme last night, where he's saying, look, you get austerity with the Conservatives. Yes, Labour is going to deal with the deficit, but Labour is also going to govern with Labour values in terms of an end to zero-hour contracts and all of that kind of stuff. Now, if the arithmetic is tight in the Commons, of course you can make common cause with people like Alex Salmond and that agenda.
Well, first of all, Alex Salmond's got to win his seat in the same way all the rest of us have to win our seats. So let's not presume the voters of any part of Scotland. But on the substantive point, if you look at where there are differences, we have taken a different course. We've said, for example, that we don't support the Scottish National Party in wanting fiscal autonomy. That, as Kezia said in your clip, would be in excess of £6 billion of additional cuts. It would be a kind of austerity max for Scotland. We just take a different approach. At the same time, Alex Salmond hasn't been willing to commit to some of the fairer taxation we want. For example, a banker's bonus tax to get the 59,000 young people under the age of 25 back into work. He hasn't been willing to support us on the energy price freeze that we want to see. He's not even willing to support us in terms of the restoration of the 50p rate. So there are quite fundamental differences on social justice and fairness, but I certainly recognise that's going to be the central battleground of the coming 6 weeks.
OK, Douglas Alexander, thank you very much indeed for joining us in Scotland Tonight this evening.